Hello, and welcome to my Distant Counter Refines video. So, off the back of my last video on the state of refines in general, I was inspired to make a video dedicated to the distant counter weapon users, as I find a lot of them are quite interesting, quite fun to build, but noticeably, out of all the Book 1 and 2 units, they have been completely without refines altogether. Much like dancers and healers and characters like Ira and Reinhardt with special skills, these are characters that have gone quite overlooked. Now, looking at the two grids here, you can see the Book 1 and 2 characters that are left over, and we're almost all the way through Book 1, and yet all the distant counter weapon users remain untouched. Looking more closely, when you read into their skills, you'll also notice that a lot of these characters share weapons. For example, you've got both the Grimas, you've got Black Knight and Zelgius, and you've got Camus and Hardin, so on and so forth. So what I've done is, in this video, I'm going to take a look at each character individually, but if they share a weapon, I'm going to cover both characters at the same time. And I'm going to show you what they come with at base, and then I'll show you 2 builds per character, even if they share weapon. That means 4 builds altogether for that one weapon. And then after each character, I'll give you a refine idea that's been completely thought out from scratch, that I think would be a good idea for them to get and would help them a lot. I mean, you may think some of them are overpowered or underpowered, but just from what I've seen in refines before, I've tried to create a realistic but exciting idea for each of these characters. So, without further ado, let's get into it. So to start off with, we've got Ryoma. Now, Ryoma comes with the Raijinto skill, and what you'll notice is a common theme throughout the video is that most of the units here have a lower res stat than would be desirable if you were running distant counter. Of course, distant counter invites the opponent to attack you first, so having a unit that's mostly offense-based in stat line is a little bit counterintuitive. I mean, take for example base Ryoma. He has 62 magic bulk if you add his HP and res together, so if a mage has 62 attack that's red, that's with no triangle advantage, 62 attack will kill him in one hit. If you're a blue mage, you're looking at around 56, 55 attack to kill him in one shot. Now, all the skills that the Ryomas come with are typically very offense-based, so in order to build him, we need to change a few things around if we're going to use Raijinto. So what I did was I ran Attack Res Unity. Now, I use this skill a lot in this video, because especially for characters that are lacking the resistance, it helps to balance your bulk a little bit more. But what a Unity skill does is, say for example, someone hits you with Attack Smoke. That's -7 attack, right? Well, what Attack Res Unity does is, if it's attack or res that's debuffed, this is attack. So it takes the 7 and it converts it into +14. So 7 of that removes your debuff, and 7 of that acts as a net bonus. And it also gives you 5 attack and res if you're within 2 spaces of an ally as well, so you have a net of +12 attack, and that's really useful. And the same with your res, it's exactly the same, it just boosts it by whatever it's been decreased by, at 5. Lull attack speed's really good because it helps your bulk, and it also helps your speed. It reduces the opponent's attack, which affects both your defensive stats, and it increases your speed. Over on Legendary M side, he's got Bushido, which boosts your special damage by 10. So with him, I made it so Noontime and Mystic Boost can help preserve him, and Bushido is what gives you the extra damage on your special that you want. Whereas with Ryoma, I chose to boost his attack higher, rather than reducing the opponent's attack, and make it so Ether can proc faster, which is a very effective healing special. Then for the second build, I use Spurn. Now Spurn's a skill that reduces the damage you take based on your speed. This works well with Flashing Blade 4 and Speed Res Solo, and it means he doesn't have to rely on his res and defense quite so much to reduce damage, but his def and res are equal, so it's also very good. And then Legendary Ryoma has flying movement, so he can use Fire Soup Sword very effectively over terrain. This is very good for his offensive stat line if you don't want to use Raijinto. For the Refine, I added Spurn, because even though Legendary Ryoma can't use Spurn as he's a flyer, both of these units really benefit because they don't want to have to rely on their defensive stats to reduce damage. It's much better to boost their attack and speed generally, and then the attack speed res plus 5 from the first effects really goes to help perform in that sense. The extra res is just there to bump it up a little bit. Special cooldown -1 helps him run a plethora of specials. It helps base Ryoma run Ether, it helps Legendary Ryoma run things like Moonbow. It's all very cool. So, not to mention he gets the 5 extra damage when special triggers if he's low on health. So, you know, it's all these different things working together. And it's just nice to be able to take advantage of what Ryoma's good at, but make it work with his weapon. Next on the list we have Ike. Now Ike's a unique case because, unlike Ryoma, he doesn't actually have the speed to help him. Now, the problem with slower units that have DC weapons is the fact that mages are already problematic enough. But if you take into account the fact that getting hit twice would be absolutely fatal, he needs to have some kind of redeemable speed stat in order to prevent follow-up attacks, or even to make a follow-up himself. Now, the sort of skills Ike come with are Ether-like skills that heal you and deal more damage, and things like Heavy Blade and Warding Breath that boost your special cooldown. So for the first build, I went with a bit more of a unique set for the basic Ike, because there's a lot of competition for him, poor guy. And I went with Carrot Cudgel. Now, Carrot Cudgel is a very useful skill that can boost your bulk and your attack, and distant counter, lull attack speed, and speed res solo all serve to help this type of build in general. Legendary Ike's a lot easier to build. Special Spiral works really well with Radiant Ether, and this is the main problem actually with the normal Ike, is that Radiant Ether makes such a difference. But I wanted to give special cooldown -1 to Ragnell, but because Radiant Ether exists, it wouldn't actually be practical to give both of these units a Slaying Edge type of thing. So I hit a bit of a wall there. Quick Riposte helps you proc Radiant Ether to begin with. Special Spiral means that you only have to get hit once to proc it. Ether's the type of skill that's better if you get hit once, because, well, if you have to hit twice, the first hit takes most of the health away. So when you proc Ether, you're only healing for like 5 or 6. Whereas if you proc Ether straight away, you've got a full HP, unit to bite into, and it heals you a lot better. So something like that, really. For the other build, I went with Attack Res Unity. I should have made this build 1, if I'm honest, because it both uses Ragnall. But Attack Res Unity is just such a good skill for distant counter users. And you'll notice that's a trend throughout this video, because a distant counter weapon frees up your A slot. Whereas if you're not running a distant counter weapon, if you want distant counter, it has to be in your A skill, and it can't be anywhere else. So they have the freedom then to run stuff like this that can boost their res, boost their attack, or their speed, or anything. Ike's build's very similar. He's got as much speed as he can get, and as much res as possible. Joint Drive speed helps your allies as well, which is useful, and Heavy Blade speeds up Ether's proc. Low attack speed and attack res unity will contribute towards Heavy Blade quite well. As for Legendary Ike, I went with a really similar build, but this one would rely on Brave Lucina, because he doesn't have anything to speed up his special cooldown. So if you have Brave Lucina, this one might be a fun one to try. Just keep in mind that you're going to have Lucina close by all the time for it to work. I guess the main weakness with Ike is that he's completely enemy phase most of the time, unless you run the Carrot Cudgel build, which is dual phase. And the problem with enemy phase is that you're relying on getting hit first, whereas at least with player phase you have a chance of not actually getting hit if you do it in one shot. So what I've done is, for the Refine, I made it enemy phase base. So if he's got above 25% HP, which is quite easy if you're someone that runs Ether, and Foe Initiates Combat gives you attack def res, which is slightly lower than Ryoma's 5, but he also makes a guaranteed follow-up, because I feel like he's got quite low speed compared to Ryoma, so Ryoma can make good use of Spurn with his speed, I can't. So to make up for that, I just gave him a guaranteed follow-up attack. Null follow-up will still counter him. Blue mages will still probably destroy him. But the point is that it makes him more relevant, it makes him stronger. And the special refine is where things can be taken advantage of and exploited a bit more. He gets special spiral and Woe Dao, which means that he can spam ether a lot more easily. I mean, it's not overpowered, it's still counterable, but it gives him something he can play around with, and he'll be able to heal himself more consistently and more constantly. So, overall, Ike needs something to better make Radiant Ether work and Ether work. Special Spiral works well for both of them, and if you run double Special Spiral, then both of them can make use of that as well. It's important that when characters share a weapon, the Refine can benefit both of them. So, in this case, I tried to make something that fits both. But yeah, hopefully I get something cool. Here we have Zander. Now, Zander is the first unit here who's on his own, not sharing his weapon with anyone. And you can tell from his skills that he came out at the start of the game. And he's another unit that is sadly falling victim to low resistance, but also he has a really low speed stat at base. Now, when I went about building him, I gave him attack res unity, because like the other characters, it really does help with the magical bulk and the preservation of your attack. And I also gave him a quick riposte seal. He's one of the only characters here that I actually give quick riposte, because the speed, unless you fully invest in his speed, it's not going to be that useful. Low attack def helps your bulk in both areas, and the def parts helps you deal a bit more damage. Joint drive attack as well. All these skills contribute to your damage quite well, and yeah, quite a fun build to utilise. It's very basic, but it's a timeless, classic, quick riposte type thing for units like this. Ninja Katana is a bit of a meme build. Attack speed solo twice. You got plenty of speed there. You get up to about 57, I believe, and that's with a buff. Sorry. But yeah, Ninja Katana Gale Force is just a build to play around with if you have the spare fodder and you want to do it, or if Zander's your favourite and you're looking for more ways of using him. Yeah, pretty fun build. I wouldn't recommend it as an optimal build, but it's probably quite good actually. You just have to see. And then, as for his refine, I went with the 25% clause, so if he's equal to or above 25% HP, he gets special cooldown charge per unit's attack. So it's like Heavy Blade without the attack requirement, it's just HP requirement. Usually with the 25% clause I give 2 effects, but this skill is multi-phase, and quite strong at that, and he's a cavalry unit, so I felt it was balanced enough. The ability to give yourself special cooldown is really useful, because when you're running Gale Force, especially, you don't want to be competing for the Heavy Blade Sacred Seal, which is used by so many units really well. So this allows them to be self-sufficient in that way. As to the Refine, I gave him something that was really similar to how Rid functions, where if you fill a certain condition, you make a follow-up and the opponent can't. So here I gave him a speed check, where if he has lower speed than the opponent by at least 3, he gets that follow-up and the opponent won't. It's really good for Gale Force, and it's really good for tanking hits too. So even if you don't run Gale Force, this dude's still going to be effective, and he's still going to be hard to double, hard to kill, and he'll be able to do a lot more damage as a result. So yeah, pretty cool refine. I hope Zander gets something along these lines, because he's a popular character, he deserves it. Next up we have Black Knight and Zelgius, 2 of my favourite characters from the first couple of generations. So what's nice about these guys is that they both share Black Luna. So unlike the Ikes, the Refine doesn't have to specialise too vaguely, if that makes sense. So you can go all out on the Black Luna synergy, because unless you're running Ether or Gale Force, you're going to be running Black Luna, because it's really strong. The only noticeable fodder really worth mentioning here is, well, it's not even fodder, but it's a skill called Warp Powder, where if you're 80% or above, you can warp to allies within 2 spaces. It's like aerobatics, but with an HP bracket instead of only certain targets, movement types. So it's quite handy for bond skill setups, you know. So as far as building them goes, I went with a Unity set on the left that uses Special Fighter, and on the right I went with a Woe Dao set that uses Special Fighter and a solo skill. Now the builds for these 2 characters are interchangeable, as they are near identical in stat line, as you'll notice by looking, and the idea of these builds is to preserve your attack and res, boost your speed a little bit, and your def is kind of already there. You want to bring your res up, because you're going to be countering mages and dragons, so res is still very useful if you're running a DC weapon, like I've mentioned. For the refine, oh wait, hang on a minute. First of all, the other build, Slaying Edge works really well with Black Luna. You could also run Distant Counter in the A slot, but I don't really like giving Distant Counter to units that have Distant Counter weapons, because if their refine ends up being good, you wasted a Distant Counter fodder. I mean, sure, it worked in the time, but Slaying Edge without Distant Counter works perfectly fine. Attack Res Unity helps your bulk, of course, and the beauty of Slaying Edge is that you can hit with Black Luna if it's ready, and get hit back, and then hit again with Black Luna if they're still alive. So it's kind of crazy how well it can work if they do still manage to live. Ninja Katanas, like Zander, it's just a fun build, so if you want to run it, you can. But yeah, all these builds can work on either of them. Armored Stride's quite good if you're running a player phase set. Attack Res Unity is good if you're running an enemy phase set. So those are the two standout skills. Special Fighter works as a dual phase skill, and if you have a speedy armor, it's always worth trying it out, see if you can make it work. Now for the refine, the fun bit. I made the 25 claws, and I put an attack speed -6 debuff on the opponent. The reason I did this is because a minus attack benefits both your def and res, and the speed helps you double more consistently. Even if you're running Bold or Vengeful Fighter, the speed will either prevent the opponent doubling you, or allow you to double through null follow-up, because, or even through Wary Fighter, because even if you can't use Bold Fighter, you can use your speed, and if you can't use your speed, you can use Bold Fighter. So unless they have speed and null follow-up, you're not going to struggle too much. Neutralizing the effects that prevent your follow-ups is so important to note there, because Bold Fighter, Vengeful Fighter, or even your speed is really important to proccing Black Luna. It's very rare you can proc it after one hit. This is why I gave him a special cooldown count -1, because at least on the enemy phase, if you get hit once, you're going to proc Black Luna. It also means that on player phase, if you have Black Luna ready at the start of combat, which is unlikely, but if you do, you can proc it twice during combat if you trade blows. And then I gave him Wodow on top of this. It seems pretty broken, but especially for army units, I wanted to make a special effort with these refines, as they seem to have aged the worst BST-wise, and they don't have access to that many great skills, if I'm totally honest, so it'd be nice to see them get something like this. Here we have Camus and Hardin. So, like the other units, Camus has lower res, which doesn't work well with a DC weapon, and Hardin here has a really nice balanced defensive line, but no speed. So what do we do with these two? Well, we make a similar build for both of them, actually. Oddly enough, both of these characters both benefit from things that boost speed and res, and even though one's a cavalry unit, one's an armor, they can both run very similar type of things, where on enemy phase they gain res, speed and attack, and they do what they can to survive the enemy phase. Now, Hardin has aged relatively well, but his speed's starting to show more age as time goes on. You have to invest a little bit more in it than you want to, and Camus the same with res. So it'd be nice if their weapon gave them more speed and res to kind of take away this disadvantage. So yeah, as far as the builds go, they're designed to be multi-phase rather than just enemy phase, because when you stick to just enemy phase, you're restricting yourself by half of the game, whereas if you're multi-phase, you can be effective on every turn. It's kind of like how odd and even wave skills aren't very good, because you're sacrificing half of your effective use to specialize on something that a dual phase unit could do equally well, but on both phases. For the second build, I went with more of a solo set for both of them. Hardin can work especially well with a Slaying Lance and Ether and Distant Counter Special Fighter. It's the classic Special Fighter armor build for speedy people. As for Camus, he can go off on his own. You could run Heavy Blade Seal if you wanted to, if you felt like you had enough speed, and you could run Gale Force. But everyone can run Gale Force, if you're a cavalry unit, so unless you're slow. But Camus' speedy boy But the problem with that then is that you're competing with Perry, and Perry's a really good Gale Force unit. So I wanted to give him something that would boost his bulk. Flowing Lance is a really nice weapon that works on pretty much every Lance unit in the game. So if you can get your hands on something like that, it would be really useful. But yeah, for their refine, I went with lull attack speed, because it helps both of them in all their builds. Lull attack speed really helps middling speed units get up and help, and makes their middling speed a bit more relevant, and it boosts both their def and res as well, so they're bulky. Especially good for distant counter units. And then I put speed res unity, which is literally just a unity skill that boosts your speed and res, because I wanted to foolproof their speed and foolproof their res, because they can't afford to lose it. And if they're going to lose it, they may as well eat off of that and grow. So it's really nice to see that this is possible. I just hope that it happens. But yeah, that's all I really have to say about these two. Next up we have Dorkas, a character I often forget is in the game. Not because he's not a cool guy, but I just don't see him anymore. It's kind of sad, really. He's another one of those low res, low speed units. He's a bit like a green Zander, but not on a horse. Because he's got min-max attack and def, but he's a distant counter user for some reason. Now, it's worth noting that he does have good skills at base. I mean, Quick Riposte is very good for slow characters that have distant counter weapons, and Infantry Pulse is a fantastic skill that many units can make good use out of. For his build, of course, I went with the Unity skill, lull attack speed, joint drive speed, speed res solo, because it works fantastically for him. You got, how much speed you got there? You got 13 effective speed, so that's 46. 3 of that is taken off the opponent and reducing their buffs to nothing. Your attack and res are foolproof, and you've got distant counter in your weapon. Ruptured Sky should proc every single combat. It will proc every time you attack if Brave Lucina's at your back. So it's a decent all-rounded build, but it still lacks the uniqueness that people might want for Dorkas. Something that other characters can't run, looking at Brave Ike. The other build is very much the same, except I gave distant counter in the A slot, which I don't really like doing for distant counter units, as I've already mentioned. And Deck Swabber is a really, really good axe weapon that can help him deal some more damage and reduce what's coming in. But it's more or less the same as the previous build. For his refine, I wanted to give him the above 25% clause because it works with Quick Riposte, which he comes with. And I wanted to kind of create a fusion between Fjorm's Ice Mirror and Brave Ike's damage reduction, where the first attack he receives he'll reduce by 50%, and then that will be added on to his attack. If in practice this becomes overpowered, during their game testing, which they probably do, then they can nerf it, but this is the idea I had. I also gave him Slaying because it helps him work with more specials and more builds, and then I gave him a native breath effect where if he's attacked he'll gain special cooldown. So he doesn't need to rely on Brave Lucina, he doesn't need to rely on Steady Breath, all these things that help him to kind of make his builds more flexible and more exciting to make just typical decent effects for a typical decent guy like him. He's a really cool character, so I hope he gets something fun like this. I know I say that for all these characters, but honestly, most of the characters that have distant counter weapons are really cool characters, so yeah, it'd be nice to see what he gets. Now moving on to Book 2 units, I understand I've actually covered quite a few Book 2 units already, but these are characters that are exclusively in Book 2. So starting with Fjorm here, Fjorm is one of those characters that benefits from merges so much. At base she is practically useless, although she's still quite usable, but at max merge she's a lot more effective. Her bulk is much higher overall, her speed's much more salvageable, and her attack is more damaging. Ice Mirror is a very unique skill that not many new characters have actually innovated with. It's kind of one of the only ones of its kind. Looking at how I would build off of this, I swapped out the attack def bond for a Unity because, well, Unity skills are better, and more, not just because they're recent, but the ability to transform debuffs into buffs is really strong. and the fact that it works within 2 spaces rather than adjacent helps so much with positioning, and also avoiding Aversa and other such sudden panic situations. Shield Pulse I kept, and you'll see why in a moment when I go on to her Refine. But the general idea of this build is to boost your offenses, because most of the time you want to be able to take some damage, otherwise you're not going to benefit from the damage reduction attack boost that Ice Mirror gives. So instead of boosting Def and Res, I boosted her attack and speed, so she could do more damage and hit twice without having to rely on Quick Riposte, because Quick Riposte, thing about it is, if you're slow and you get hit twice, you're getting double damage, aren't you? You know, if you don't kill in one hit, you're going to get hit again, and you're probably going to die. Whereas with speed, unless they have a guaranteed follow-up, you're not going to get hit twice, so you'll probably live a lot longer. It means you can take a hit from someone else, for example, or you'll have time to proc your specials. Things like this are all worth considering. Then I went with a Flowing Lance build, if you want to run it. I doubt it'll be quite as good, but, you know, it's like having her Lepta Lance of Ice with a Flowing Lance Ace skill effect. It's not much different, but it's the same principle. So, for her Refine, I decided to go with something that works with Ice Mirror, rather than boost her Def and Res. Because like I said, you know, the more damage you're taking initially, the more Ice Mirror is going to reduce, and the more damage Ice Mirror is going to produce. So by reducing it by 10, you're taking 10 less damage, which is, you know, already really good, but it boosts your damage by a good portion of that. And then I gave her attack speed unity, because like I said, I don't want to boost her Def and Res, I want to boost her attack and her speed, because that's what she needs. Even without merges, speed and attack are the most important things to buff. So you can double naturally, you can deal lots of damage, and you can make sure that Ice Mirror is actually going towards something rather than making 5 into 0, you know? You'd make 24 into 7 or something. It's just really decent. But yeah, that's it with Fjorm. Very simple, refined, works with Ice Mirror, and hopefully they do something like this to make Ice Mirror a little bit more interesting, a little bit more fun to use as well, and not have to rely on merges all the time. Because merges are... we don't like merges. We like merging our favourite character, but not every character. Next up we have Tiki. Tiki is one of the first units we have here with a slightly different weapon effect. While she has distant counter, she also has effective against dragons. And as a dragon, she has the adaptive damage, where if the opponent is ranged, so they're like a mage or an archer, then she will adapt to their lower of defense or res, which is really handy. Her skill set works around proccing Moonbow instantly on enemy phase, because Fierce Breath will make Moonbow activate immediately, and Bold Fighter means she'll always double on player phase, even if she doesn't quite make it with speed. Unless you have no follow-up or something, but generally speaking, you're going to be doubling on player phase, especially since you have natural speed as well. So, if one doesn't work, the other will. With Everyone is a skill that only works if you have someone next to you at the start of the turn, and what it does is it grants both of you Def Res +5, which is pretty basic, but with her Refine I gave her, you'll see how I made it work. First build is Attack Res Unity with Speed Res Solo. You've seen this build a couple of times in this video already, but just to go over it, if you skip to this character, you want to preserve your attack and res with Attack Res Unity. You want to boost your speed just a little bit more so you double consistently, and Ether's there with Special Fighter to constantly heal yourself just at the right moment. You either heal immediately or you heal after 3 hits, because after 2 hits you tend to have a low HP opponent that you can't really heal very much off of. Say you hit them already, and then they hit you again, and you hit them with Ether, you're only healing for like 5 or 6. So it's good to heal off of the full HP opponents rather than ones you've already done damage to, if that makes sense. So yeah, that's the first build. And then the second build is a solo set, which is really fun. Daring Fighter. Make use of your speed and attack and your res hitting dragon damage, because you're naturally targeting res, and you can go in with your speed. The Threaten helps you deal even more damage because you're more likely to double and reduces damage coming in. Draconic Aura is a very good special for player face sets because it's a very strong skill when you've boosted your attack quite so much. For her Refine, I gave her a With Everyone, but an attack speed variant. So at the start of the turn, she'll gain 5 tool stats if she's got an ally next to her, as will they. And then her Refine, even though it looks like a really big boy effect, it's literally just bonus double a Unity, okay? So Unity skills take a debuff, convert it into a bonus, pretty much, as you can see by the description. But I made it for all of her stats. So the idea is that you stand next to an ally, at the start of the turn you gain 5 tool stats, and so do they. Both of you also get a bonus doubler effect for that turn, which means your +5 is treated as a +10 during combat. Then, Tiki herself has a Unity effect, where if any of her stats are debuffed, that particular stat is buffed into reverse, where if you have -7, you gain +14 to mitigate that, and then you get the plus thing on top of it from bonus doubler, which is really useful. So yeah, the idea of this was just to give her buffs that are immune to panic and things like that, or at least not as susceptible to. She's already got enough weaknesses as an armoured dragon, so this is just a way of making her a bit stronger. Then finally we have the Grimas. Now, male Grima is my favourite character in the entire game, and as for female Grima, I plan on merging her sometime in the future. She's in my top 4 merge projects. I just still haven't decided who to do yet. It's between her, Zelgius, Fallen Celica, and Legendary Crom, if you're interested. But anyway, on to these two. These two are the most unique case, in my opinion, because they share a weapon, and they're both dragons. One of them's armour, one of them's a flyer, one of them's green, one of them's colours. There's just so much different about each of them. So when it comes to making a refine, what do you actually do? Well, first I'll show you how I build them. Because, you know, their skills are things that you may have seen many times. Dragon Skin, if you're wondering, is neutralising flyer bonuses and then granting 4 def and res if the opponent initiates. So nothing too extreme, nothing too strong. So what I did was I ran a build that boosts their speed and their res and their attack, just everything really. Both of them are characters that benefit from merges. Female Grima especially gains some merges. She's like a flying Fjorm in that sense. Whereas male Grima's more like a green Tiki that's got less speed. So, yeah, male Grima can run speed really effectively. I mean, considering this is without speed plus IVs, which would be another 3. I know these are all max investment, but if I'm perfectly honest, if you're running Book 1 and 2 units, you're going to need merges to make them work, or they're just going to fall behind. That's just how it is. Unless they're someone like Ophelia or Lewin or Ira, you know, they don't need merges quite as much. But units like these need merges to be good. So you may as well go full investment. So yeah, male Grima's dual-phased, and funny enough, he works perfectly with female Grima. If you replace Mystic Boost for Guidance, she can literally fly around him, and he can teleport to her, and they can move as this invincible fortress duo unit, essentially, which is really fun. The only problem is I've only got one of these 2 builds, and you could probably guess which one that is. So, yeah, looking at the other build, there's a solo build. These are very flexible, especially on female Grima's side. You could run attack speed solo for all you care. You know, you could run anything. But both these units can run solo skills quite well. Male Grima has the advantage of Special Fighter, which is the breath skill and guard skill on both turns. Female Grima can run Rhine skills, which are also really good. It's like having joint drive, attack, and speed together, but better. Or not even that, joint drive, speed, def, res. It's just really good. It's also a debuff, which, like I said earlier, is stronger than a buff. So, you know, this sort of thing, it's all very strong. Expiration is a very good skill, actually, already. But it would be nice if Expiration got something that made them more unique and also stack up to all the newer dragons that are, well, a lot of them are just better, really. Like Winter Sophis, for example, trumps both of these, especially male Grima. She just completely replaces him. So, for their base effect, it's very simple. If you're above the 25% threshold, or equal to, you get to inflict -5 to all stats on the foe, you know? And then I also added plus 10 HP, because we have a HP threshold. I gave 2 small effects, or 2 effects. This is where things get fun. Like I said, I do like male Grima a lot, so I wanted to give him something really fun. But none of the refines in this video are particularly overpowered when you look into it. You just have to understand the weapon a bit more first. So, if unit falls in battle, unit revives on the next turn with half HP. This is both of them. So, as a little Easter egg, if Robin kills one of these, then they don't revive. That's just a little awakening reference. When reviving, reduces HP of all enemies within 3 spaces by foe's HP minus unit's current attack. So in other words, if I have a 65 attack Grima, your opponents are going to take 65 damage when he reawakens. That's why I kept the attack IV. It also gives you Vantage for just 1 turn, okay? So you could sacrifice your B skill for Vantage if you really wanted to, but then you're relying on killing your unit. But that's it, really. It's literally just this unit revives and reduces the HP of people around him, or her, either one. So rather than trying to cure the weaknesses, I took advantage of them and thought, you know what, let's just let him die, and then when he revives, just do something really cool. It's not that strong, because you could just one-shot him again after the Vantage is worn off, you know? Because Dragon Killers will destroy. But the point is to give something unique that's fun to use, and this does both. If unit falls in combat, the state of the unit is not considered fallen. And the point of this is that in GHBs and legendary battles, you lose the battle if one of your allies falls, right? Well, the first time he dies, if he does revive, he gets a little soul token, so the game doesn't count him as dead yet. But if he dies a second time, then yeah, he's dead. So, or she's dead. So, I wanted to create something unique. And with enough time, I could probably come up with something truly unique for all these characters. But for Grima, it just made a lot of sense straight away to make something like this. And it just seems so fun. I really wanted it to come true. So, yeah, that's pretty much everything for Grima. But yeah, that's all I have to say for all these characters today. And I hope you found this video somewhat informative or useful, or even interesting. Because all these units have the same weapon, and yet I could think of so many different builds to fit each of their different stat lines and way they work. And I'm just waiting to see when they'll drop the DC Weapon Refine updates. You know, what are they waiting for before they do that? And it would be great to see whether they do change the base effect at all to add anything additional, or whether they'll just go straight into the secondary effect. I mean, if I'm honest, I really do hope that they give decent refines, because most of these characters are either main characters or very popular characters, and it would be lovely to see them get something truly special and exciting and fun to use, kind of like the Brave Heroes, if that makes sense, you know? I mean, characters like Zelgius, Black Knight, Grimas, Fjorm, they're all very popular and very main characters to their games, so I don't see why they wouldn't give something interesting to all of them. But yeah, I hope you all have a great rest of your day, or night, whenever you're watching this. And I wish you all the best with your summons for now. I'll be seeing you in the next video. Stay safe, and have a good one. Goodbye.